4, 6. Guys in the back, please come on back. Okay. I want to try to be respectful of our guest Mark Howard's time, so if we can get rolling with this, that would be terrific. The next piece of the day is both an update and a terrific conversation, we're sure, on the Reentry Ready project, which is such an important one for us. And our very talented project director, Stephanie McGency, will take it from here. Stephanie.
Good afternoon. I've been here at this podium enough for you all to know that when I say good afternoon, I'm looking for a good afternoon. Thank you. Now I feel very welcome to be here in front of you. I am super happy to be presenting for the first time before lunch. Although that puts me probably in an equally precarious position of standing in between you and lunch, but we'll work through that. I don't have much to share by way of update other than some really fantastic news, which is that we are releasing our report on Reentry Ready on June the 26th at an event here in DC. Probably by the time you all get back to your inboxes early tomorrow morning, there will be details about the event. We would really, really appreciate it if as many of you as possible could make your way there to hear from several of our stakeholders, but more importantly from 3 formerly incarcerated women who have reviewed our report and have assured us that it passes muster in terms of will the kinds of things that our stakeholder table is recommending, that they would actually be helpful to them to move forward more positively in their lives as formerly incarcerated women. So be on the lookout for that invitation, as well as details about a microsite that we are developing. If you may recall, my colleague Russell created one for our economic mobility and poverty work. We are doing the same with Reentry Ready, so there'll be lots of information, executive summary of the report, the full report, highlights about programs around the country that are doing really great things in support of currently and formerly incarcerated individuals, information about our stakeholders, just chock full of resources, along with a social media toolkit that we have created. So we're going to make it super easy for you all to tell all of your friends about the report. There will be sample tweets and Facebook posts and images, just a panoply of things that you can use to help us spread the word about Reentry Ready. So we'll be tracking social media to see who's helping us out, and hopefully it'll be all of you. It's my pleasure today to spend some time having a fireside chat, and you all can eavesdrop for a while, with one of our stakeholders, Dr. Mark Howard. I want to introduce Mark, give him an opportunity to share a little bit about his work with you. Then I have some questions, and we're going to leave lots of time for you all to ask him some questions as well. He is a person of such goodwill, and I respect him for the work that he is doing. And once you hear him, you will feel exactly the same. But let me give you the formal, embarrassing introduction of Mark Howard. So Mark is the director of the Prisons and Justice Initiative and a professor of government and law at Georgetown Law School. He's the founding director of the Prisons and Justice Initiative, which brings together scholars, practitioners, and students to examine the problem of mass incarceration from multiple perspectives. He also teaches regularly in the Prison Scholars Program at the Jessup Correctional Institution, which is a maximum security prison here in Maryland. His work addresses the deep challenges of contemporary democracy and the tragedy of criminal justice and prisons in America. His most recent book is titled Unusually Cruel: Prisons, Punishment, and the Real American Exceptionalism. In addition to his work on prison reform, Mark is the author of 2 other prize-winning books, along with numerous academic articles and several very august journals related to political science, criminal justice, and the like. He's also written, though, several pieces about life lessons of sports in Tennis Magazine and Sports Illustrated, including one about being Yvonne Lindell's practice partner and another about playing tennis with the San Quentin prison tennis team. And we've shared many stories about being sports parents. His daughter plays tennis. My son played tennis for a while, but spent more time playing baseball. But just the joy of sport and being able to share that with multiple people in different populations, we've talked a lot about that. So I'm going to give Mark a chance to say a few things, and then I have questions, and we'll look forward to hearing questions from you.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Stephanie, for that generous introduction. Thanks for the invitation to come speak here, and thank you all for your support of Convergent, which is really an extraordinary organization. I'm so lucky to have had the experience to participate in this Reentry Ready project, which we'll talk about. You know, everyone who works in criminal justice, I've sort of noticed lately, has a backstory, and I have one too. Because today, pretty much every waking hour of the day, and I don't sleep much, is spent trying to figure out how I can help get people out of prison who don't belong there and help people succeed and thrive when they get out of prison. But this is actually a second career for me. I was hired at Georgetown as a specialist in European politics. I pulled a bait and switch. I got tenure, and then I went in a completely different direction. I'm half French, I'm a dual citizen, I speak French as my native language, I speak German and Russian, I lived in both of those countries, and I've written other books that deal with topics all related to Europe. But I had this personal backstory that was a part of my life that was really kept private, but that started to grow and grow to the point that it took over and really changed my life. And that was when I was 17 years old. My childhood friend named Marty Tankleff in Suffolk County, Long Island, in a town called Port Jefferson. Marty woke up on the first day of our senior year of high school when we just turned 17, and we'd known each other since we were 3 years old. We'd actually gone to preschool together at a place called Lovey-Dovey Preschool. But on that day, something very unlovey-dovey happened, which is that Marty woke up to find his parents brutally murdered. And by the end of that day, Marty was in handcuffs, accused, arrested, eventually the next summer convicted of murdering his parents. And I believe that Marty was innocent, and I advocated for him at the time. I was the editor of our little high school newspaper called The Purple Parrot, which in retrospect, if they could give Pulitzer Prizes, 25 years after the fact or whatever, The Purple Parrot deserves one, because it turns out we're the only paper in all of New York, and there was extensive coverage that got the story right, which was that Marty was innocent. And when he was convicted, we went our separate ways. And it was before the Innocence Project. The murder was in 1988. This conviction happened in 1990. Before the Innocence Project, before DNA. And I felt powerless. And I believed he was innocent. I told everyone that I could that I thought he was innocent. And I had reasons for it. I knew that his father's business partner had been involved, and they were arguing over debt and so on, and he'd been the last person to leave the house. But in a court of law, he was convicted, and it seemed like there was no hope. So I moved on with my life and went to college, went to grad school, started teaching at Georgetown, got married, and had kids and so on. But I would always tell people about Marty. Well, one day I decided I'm going to reconnect with Marty. We started writing letters. We started talking on the phone. I started visiting him, which I did 7 times. And then I suddenly started to get involved with his legal team. I started meeting with his lawyers, many of whom were in D.C. And we started discovering more and more evidence about his case. And it got to the point where I made a crazy decision, which was that I was going to go to law school to get Marty out of prison. And it turns out just before I started, he was exonerated. Now, he'd served almost 18 years, 6,338 days and nights. And many people thought, okay, Marty's out, so mission accomplished, put up your flag, go back to working on Europe or whatever you do. And the problem was that my eyes had been opened to this injustice, and I couldn't close them again, because what I realized is that there's so many other people who don't belong in prison. And the next step was looking at more wrongful conviction cases, which was sort of a logical extension of Marty. But then I started teaching about the criminal justice system, and I was going to law school at the same time. I was doing both full-time. It was a crazy existence that I had. And the more I learned, the more I realized how fundamentally broken the criminal justice system is. And I didn't come at this in some angry, flag-burning, anti-American way. It was actually the exact opposite. It was that I was trying to find the ideals that I had been, fed and perhaps brainwashed to believe in, and try to find a way to restore them. And so I started teaching a course at Georgetown, which now I'm told has the longest waiting list of any course at Georgetown, called Prisons and Punishment. And the highlight of that was that I would bring students on a tour of a maximum security prison, the Jessup Correctional Institution. And we'd get to interact with incarcerated residents there, but it was very stilted. It was the warden was watching and listening, and so it was a very kind of limited conversation. So I wanted to do more. And then I decided I wanted to teach in a prison. And so I started teaching at Jessup, and I started going in every week and developing ties with incarcerated students there that were extraordinary. And I discovered something that I tell my Georgetown students all the time, which is that intelligence and education are two separate concepts. And some of the smartest people I know dropped out of school in 8th grade because they were on the streets of Baltimore dealing drugs, and unfortunately were also carrying a gun, which led to a body and a life lost and another life lost with a life sentence in prison. But that some of those people are extraordinary, and that when you look at them 20 years later, 30 years later, as students in my class, they're just wonderful. They have so much to offer. And so I went deeper and deeper in terms of my teaching, in terms of my research, which led to the book Stephanie mentioned, Unusually Cruel, and then started a program at Georgetown, the Prisons and Justice Initiative, with some seed money from the president's office and then some support from alumni, where basically we're an academic center where we host a lot of major events on campus with hundreds and hundreds of people. We have tremendous student energy and enthusiasm. But we also run programs that maybe don't get as much attention on campus, but that I'm so deeply committed to. And one is the Scholars Program at the DC Jail, where we offer courses, and we've been doing this now for a year and a half. And we actually have credit-bearing courses, so we have Georgetown students who are incarcerated and getting Georgetown credits, Georgetown transcripts for the work they're doing inside. And we're teaching this at a high level. Next semester, I'm actually teaching our first ever mixed course, where they're going to be outside students coming in, sitting side by side and working with our incarcerated students. We're also the only coeducational prison education program in the country, where we have men and women incarcerated who are in the same classroom space, which is unheard of in the correctional setting. We also have the Pivot program, which just launched this year, which I'm very proud of, which was a dream of mine a while ago, which is for formerly incarcerated people who, when they're released, can study entrepreneurship and business and get practical business experience so that they can then become successful employees, business leaders, and entrepreneurs. And that's been going on since this January, and we'll have a second cohort that starts in September. And it's something that I expect you'll be hearing a lot more of in the future, and that we're really, really proud of. It's the first of its kind that's specifically for formerly incarcerated people to support them and lead to success stories. So there's so much more, and I sometimes give an hour-long talk, and there's a lot to this. I want to mention a couple things and then just show a quick video that'll give you a sense, I hope, of why I feel so passionate about the work that I do, why I love my students in a way that is just impossible to express, and why I feel like I'm with them on this journey from the worst place imaginable, prison. Prison is an absolutely horrible, horrible place, and I understand that people have made mistakes and have committed acts that have led them to be sent there. But we as a society need to think about a fundamental question, which is that 95% of people who are incarcerated are coming home one day, whether we like it or not. They're coming home. And so we need to think, who do we want them to be? Who do you want to be your neighbors, your community members? What I think is that we want people who have improved, who have transformed, who have become intelligent, thoughtful, rational, caring people. And so the programs that I'm involved in are all about that, while people are incarcerated and when they come home. And this is something that I hope we'll be hearing a lot more of in the future, whether it's publicity about our programs or about this larger project. This is part of a movement, and we have some momentum now. The Reentry Ready project, I think, is a part of the wind in our sails, and it's just a great time, actually, to be working on criminal justice. And I'll just, before I have the video play, I want to mention one thing just to close the loop on my friend Marty, which is that Marty got out, it's been over 10 years. He within 2 weeks was in college classes, got his bachelor's degree in record time, got his law degree, passed the New York bar exam, is now about to be admitted to practice law in New York, and co-teaches a course with me at Georgetown now, because he used to come and speak to my class, and the students loved it so much that I thought, let's just see if we can bring Marty in a more comprehensive way. And so we co-teach a class called Making an Exoneree. It meets every Friday in the spring semester for 5 hours. It's a 5-credit course, and we have our students working not on moot court, that type of thing. They're working on real live wrongful conviction cases, where they're taking cases that have reached dead ends, sometimes people who have no representation and no hope. And we work on these cases, and the students reinvestigate, and they travel, and we've gotten some support that allows us to have a budget to send the students around. And it's extraordinary to the point that one of our cases from the spring 2018 semester, a man named Valentino Dixon, who had served 27 years in prison, most of them in Attica, right, one of the worst prisons in the country, was exonerated thanks to the discoveries made by the students in our class. Without them, he would still be in prison. Thank you. And so that's a line of work that I will continue working in, which is exonerations and getting people out of prison who are wrongfully convicted. But another major part, really the biggest part, is about supporting people on their journey to finishing their time and to a personal transformation process, and then communicating to the rest of the world about the humanity of the people inside. So I'd like to now just end my part with a short video, a 3-minute video about our Scholars Program, just as we move to offering credit-bearing courses, and it features 3 of our Georgetown scholars. And I'll get out of the way. Welcome to the end of semester celebration for the Georgetown Scholars Program at the DC Jail. Today we're having a celebration to honor the end of our first semester, which was our pilot program.
Just keep going. We'll stop it though at a.
Okay.
You'll tell me when it would be a good time, because I don't think we have the other one queued up.
Oh, you don't have the one queued up? Okay. Welcome to the end of semester celebration for the Georgetown Scholars Program at the DC Jail. Today we're having a celebration to honor the end of our first semester, which was our pilot program. And we're going to have outside visitors coming in, the Georgetown students who took inside-outside courses that were mixed with the incarcerated students are going to be there. And it's really to celebrate their success.
Georgetown, once again, I appreciate this partnership. And this is just the beginning. We will become the model, because learning is a lifelong mission.
So the U.S. locks up more people than any other country in the world. We have 2.3 million Americans today who are in prison and jail. We've got another 4 million on probation, another million on parole. That's over 7 million who are under some form of correctional supervision. Given how many people are in prison and jail, I think it's imperative that we as a society try to help them succeed when they're going to get out. The reality is that 95% of people who are currently locked up will return to society. And we need to think about what type of people do we want them to be? What type of family members, community members, citizens do we want them to be? So I founded the Prisons and Justice Initiative at Georgetown in 2016. And one of the programs that we've been running is the Georgetown Prison Scholars Program at the DC Jail. And the idea there is to use Georgetown's resources in terms of faculty and to some extent students, where Georgetown students come inside and work side by side with incarcerated students. And those are really extraordinary because you can see the impact that it has on both groups.
I just thank you all so much, because this has been the most rewarding Georgetown classroom that I've sat in.
Salute to my classmates. It was an honor to share this space with you.
The fact that you see us, you hear us, and you feel us, that means a lot to me.
It sounds maybe hyperbolic, but this class has definitely changed my life.
It takes you on a mental journey, and you are challenged to look words up, to digest concepts and philosophies.
And it helped me realize that I don't have to just do what I thought I had to do. I can do so much more. I have more potential, and it made me feel better about myself every day.
So we've had a number of Georgetown faculty teaching in the program and a lot more who want to teach in the future, and they've just been blown away. They say they've never had such an engaged committed, enthusiastic group of students in their teaching lives before.
I've just found this experience just amazing.
The collaboration, I've never seen anything like that. And that's because you guys took each other serious, because you guys cared about the work that you did together.
What you've shown me, and what you've helped me show the country, is that there are people like you everywhere. There are brilliant, curious, conscientious, talented students sitting in cells who have something to learn and something to teach.
To make an impact on each other's lives and hopefully on the lives of the future people who come through.
What we've done in just one semester of a pilot program is pretty phenomenal, but we want to keep pushing ahead and go further and deeper. And that means to offer actual credit-bearing courses so that students inside who are doing the work can get credit, college credit, for their work.
So when you understand or hear that Georgetown is offering a course, and like, wait a minute, I have an opportunity to take a course with Georgetown? Like, wow, this is awesome right here.
Even wearing this t-shirt is just a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I'm so happy that I get to be a part of it, even in the situation that I'm in. It's a very big honor.
The single most transformative factor in terms of successful reentry is education while incarcerated.
Education is the catalyst for success. And so if we fundamentally understand that we are changing the trajectory, not just for you, right? But for the future generations, as far as your children and as far as your community.
If we can provide people with even a little bit of a higher education and certainly provide them with degrees and courses, people will not return to a life of crime. Their families will be more successful and society will be safer.
Maybe I just needed college to help me realize what I can do within myself. Maybe I just needed school to help me see that I can do better and that this isn't just a terrible life ending. It's just a small little speed bump that will help me realize I need to turn a different direction.
I can hardly put into words just how meaningful, powerful, and inspiring it's been to me to work inside of correctional facilities. And I'm so proud to work for an institution, Georgetown University, that really gets and supports this endeavor. Because it's not only rational and cost-effective to be doing this and making our society safer and lowering costs, but it's actually morally and ethically the right thing to do.
I will walk away from this program having gained an extended family.
And it's helped us create a friendship, you could say, on a more mature level.
But also we can share the fact that we share the same planet, that we come from the same human background. And that sense of humanity is what I've learned from the program personally.
Georgetown agree. Let's go. 1, 2, 3. Georgetown!
So let me just add one little thing. Thank you. That was a little bit longer. There was another one that was an updated version, but that actually is great. I'm glad you got to see that. It took a little bit of our time. But we do have an update, which is we now are offering credit-bearing courses. When we made that documentary, we were looking for support to get in that direction. Now we are, and we're looking to keep expanding that and eventually offering degrees. Yeah.
Thank you. So the jig is up. You all just got to see how I've been fortunate to be paid to hang out with people, exceptional people like Dr. Mark Howard. So I have a couple of questions, and like I said, we'll leave time for you all to ask some questions too. Mark, our table was composed of a really diverse group of people, like a convergence table typically is. What do you think about how the diversity of all the perspectives we had sitting at the table helped us to arrive at this really robust set of recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was amazing. It's so rare in this age, and you all know this in every sphere, to have people across the aisle or with different political views engage in a rational, calm, constructive conversation that's with a shared value and support and really a shared goal. Criminal justice reform is actually the one issue these days where there is some consensus, but you know, it's frayed a little bit and it's challenging in these times. Some of us knew each other in different areas, and I've always operated in a way that's nonpartisan, that's bipartisan, whatever you want, that simply looks at people who care about the goal of getting people out of prison who don't belong there and want to support that project. But what was wonderful about our conversations is that you had people who, on paper, would seem to be radically different. And when we had these conversations, we realized really quickly that there's a lot that everybody has in common. So it was an extraordinary experience, very different from most gatherings and conferences and workshops where you have sort of the silos, where you have people who already know each other because they're already in the same camps, and they just sort of reinforce their camp kind of mentality or almost tribe mentality. In this case, there was just something great about the broad tent and really the respect, because I think that everybody in that group was respectful of everybody else and treated them that way. And it's not like we all came to exactly the same point, but there was a lot of convergence, sorry, that is the right word, that took place, and it's something very special to have been a part of.
So I want to talk about the diversity of our table in a very specific example related to one of our stakeholders was a representative of a private prison. And during the interview process, in the interviews that we conducted before we selected the table, there was lots of angst about whether or not it would be appropriate to have private prisons sitting at the table. I hope I'm not speaking out of school to say that you were one of those folks who gave me the business a little bit about private prisons.
Well, but I thought they should be part of the conversation.
So how has the experience of sitting at the table with Darren influenced your views about private prisons and their role?
It's been amazing, actually. I mean, I remember the first dinner after the first little half day we'd had or something at the very beginning, where I realized I'm going to be sitting at dinner next to somebody from CoreCivic, which used to be called Corrections Corporation of America, which is often known as the devil, essentially, in some circles in terms of the way they've contributed to the mass incarceration crisis. Or at least that's part of the kind of common thinking. I even texted my wife and said, oh my God, well, how am I going to make it through dinner? We had a wonderful conversation, and I realized that there was a lot of common ground. I also realized that I had a lot of misconceptions. And so part of the process is seeing other people come together, but part of it is yourself, right? Is opening up yourself and listening to other people. And with Darren and with CoreCivic, I wound up I was going to Nashville actually with my daughter on a recruiting trip to Vanderbilt University and I told him, and CoreCivic's based in Nashville and he lives there, and I said, hey, would it be possible for us to visit a prison while we're there? With my 17-year-old daughter, by the way, which is interesting too, because we go straight from the plane to go visit this prison, and then she goes to meet the coach who says, oh, what have you seen in Nashville? Thinking it's like country music, or, and she goes, oh, we just came from a prison. Never heard that one before, but it was a wonderful visit, and I was, my views were changed in the sense that I don't think that private prisons are the problem. They are no better or no worse than other prisons. All prisons are awful, and everybody involved in corrections needs to be thinking about solutions. And I became convinced of Darren and of the other people working with him of their good faith in seeking solutions. And I've seen that in actions and policy changes that they've made. I think this conversation was really good for them as well. And I deeply respect him as a person and have had gatherings with him when he's been in DC. And it's something that, I'm not buying stock or anything, don't get me wrong, but it's something where I think that we're much better off coming together and talking about the real problem than having this boogeyman thing and saying it's just private prison companies. And I get asked about it all the time. People say, isn't the problem private prisons? And I throw it back as a question. I say, what percentage of people in the country are in private prisons? And I'll hear someone say 50%, 70%, 90%. And I say, no, the answer is 8.8%. That's a pretty small amount. You can't say that that is the problem. And in terms of the quality, I've been to a lot of prisons around the country. I've been to some state prisons that are awful. I mean, you can't imagine. We we treat animals so much better than we treat human beings in this country. That is the problem, and it's a fundamental shared problem. It's not one about just private prison companies.
You just touched on two things that I wanted to raise with the group, or have you talked to the group. We treat prison as if it's a one-size-fits-all enterprise. You know, you are locked up, everybody's dressed the same, you know, you have an opportunity to do the same kinds of things theoretically when you're inside. But everyone that goes to jail and prison are very different and unique individuals. We talked about in our dialogue the importance of starting with some sort of an assessment to find out not only what the challenges are that an individual has, but what their strengths are. And like in the Prison Scholars Program, how we can build on that. How do we sell, for lack of a better word, the critical nature of that assessment to people who say, just lock them up and throw away the key?
Yeah. I mean, you know, there are a variety of arguments, and some of these are more kind of in line with one ideological view than another necessarily, but I think they're all important. So one is just what I mentioned in the video I said earlier about the 95%. I mean, that's just something that we all need to think about. Another that I think is more, you know, in line with a conservative argument is the cost. I mean, that we spend now about $85 billion a year on corrections. Right? This is, and if you have a belief in smaller government, limited government, that's insane, right? And so in some states, you know, it's 20+% of the budget. It's way more than education. So leaving aside that might be out of whack, it's just a huge amount. And so if you believe in limiting government, if you believe in decreasing costs, then you should be in favor of solutions that avoid incarceration. Then there's the public safety argument. Which is also important in terms of victims. And do you want people when they come out to have no opportunities, no hope, and then go back into committing crimes? And then that's going to lead to other people being victimized. Why would anyone ever support a policy that would lead to more people being victimized? Right? And then there's, of course, the human side in terms of positively helping people, which I believe in very strongly. I believe in all of these points, but I think that one is something that's critical because I see it with my own eyes, that we need to support people who, and we talk about second chances, but honestly, most people never had a first chance in the first place with poverty and the situations that they've grown up in and the horror stories. I've heard so much that has just blown my mind about suffering and the trauma people go through in their childhood is unthinkable. And so I think there's so many good reasons for caring about people as individuals. And what prisons should do, in my view, and I derive this from my research on the European countries in the book Unusually Cruel, is that we should view prison as the punishment is separation from society. Right? And I want to make it clear, I'm not a prison abolitionist. Right? There are a number of people, I know many of my friends, think that there should be no prisons. I don't say that. I think that prison should be the separation from society from people who are dangerous and people who have hurt or will hurt other people. I'm not opposed to that. But I think that the punishment ends at that point. It's the separation. After that, it's about having these people change, having them reform so that when they do get out, no one else will be hurt. So leaving aside that we lock people up for drug crimes, for nonviolent crimes, for property crimes, that I think is vastly inappropriate. But even people who've committed violent crimes can change. I mean, I could give you hundreds of examples of this. The point is we need to be supporting people along that path and making that possible. But if you just lock someone up in a cage for years and years and just poke them in the eye, which is basically what we're doing in prison, just degrading people, giving them nothing to do, no opportunity, just taking young men full of testosterone and anger and bitterness and just leaving them to their own devices, and there's violence that ensues. We're making people worse, not better, which means we're making our society worse, not better. So in my view, it's a win-win, and it saves costs and lowers victims by having a positive, supportive environment that actually cares about people, supports people. It's a win-win-win-win-win. I mean, on every factor, it's a win.
So my last question, because I don't want you all to think that our dialogue was all sunlight and agreement on every point. We had two really hard conversations. about the role that race and equity play in the criminal justice system, and the fact that more black and brown men are incarcerated
And women.
and women for longer periods of time for crimes for which their white peers are often not even tried, never mind incarcerated behind. What would you say to Convergence about how to infuse race equity into our dialogues? Because for every issue that we addressed, there is a race equity component to it. Housing, guns, economic mobility, healthcare, all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a critical issue. It's really, really challenging in terms of how to address it. When I'm teaching my prisons and punishment course, I tell them on day one, our first unit is going to be about race, and we're going to spend 5 sessions talking about it, grappling with it, dealing with it, reading about the reality. And the reality is that there are racial disparities at every single stage of the criminal justice system, from policing to arrest, to charges, to convictions, to sentencing, to how people are treated when they're in prison, who gets sent to solitary confinement and so on, to who gets parole, and then to success chances upon reentry. That race and racism are a central element of our society that we cannot deny. I had it even in my own class when I send students to the DC Superior Court, where they observe arraignments, preliminary hearings, and a felony trial. And one year I had 2 African American, I have more, I have many minority students in my classes, but there were 2 who were put in handcuffs because the police at the DC Superior Court thought they looked like they were a suspect who had a warrant out on them and put them in handcuffs. This is a horrible moment for me because I'm thinking I'm doing a service by exposing them to the criminal justice system, but I didn't want that much exposure. And so it is undeniable. But in the conversations that we have, I think here there is a bit of a fault line that forms, which is that there's some groups that, it's not that they deny any of this, but they say that we don't want to talk about it because with our constituents, it's going to immediately go in another direction that they're opposed to. Right. And so there's a organization that's very influential, Right on Crime. They organize many Republicans in states, and they've had a lot of success, and they've been leaders. I want to stress this, that without this organization, Right on Crime, there would not have been criminal justice reform in several dozen states. It's crucial. But for them, if we talk about all these racial disparities, they're going to lose their momentum. They're not going to be able to make their arguments. And I don't have a solution for it, but I can't see there being a way forward without talking about it. And maybe the way to talk about it is not one with finger wagging and blaming and so on, but just baseline realities. But it's a very, very difficult issue.
And we grappled with it.
And we grappled with it, yeah. And we never solved it.
No, but there were rich conversations.
That's right, yeah.
So we have a few minutes until Rich says we're done?
About 5 minutes.
Yes.
My question, I'm from Georgia. Our governor, Surprised, Governor Deal,
Yeah.
governor, took a leadership position.
He did.
The big issue, I think, for us is they're still wearing ankle bracelets and, they're out in the community with no support.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just not going to end well. They just cut the cost. Cost was the issue in Georgia, nothing else.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that if they want to cut costs, but I wonder if you've gone to the next level of how are we going to capture these folks before they get lost?
Yeah.
And get them back in school, get them in community, doing the same work you're doing in prison, because I think it's going to happen everywhere. This is the direction it's going to go without the support for folks when they get out.
Yeah, no, that's a great point and question. I think that, Georgia has seen a drop in incarceration, as have many states, and that's also, the Right on Crime example I just mentioned played a major role there. But you're also right that it's limited, and it could potentially backfire if there are not opportunities. I think that that's a perfect opportunity to kind of bring forward some of the main elements of the Reentry Ready findings, which is that we need to move beyond silos of organizations, that might just be corrections or public health or public safety or, different things that have their own budget where all they care about is what happens within. And we need to look at it holistically. And that's really the next challenge in terms of a pilot program, in terms of implementing the recommendations, which is that we need to look at it all. Because actually, all the costs will go down if we can break through those silos and think rationally about solutions. But unfortunately, there are a lot of vested interests who have their fiefdom and their budget and their title and who don't want to, change that. But the only way to get to better solutions is going to be a systemic approach. And I think we have some momentum in a few states. The one that always got highlighted at our meetings was North Dakota. Of course, North Dakota is not exactly the typical state in the country for many reasons. But we're seeing there that with support from the highest levels on down, that you can have a rethinking of how we structure the different, agencies that are involved in corrections and reentry, and that if we do so, we can have more productive outcomes. It's so obvious why we need it, but it's going to take strong political will. And it's not even about partisanship there. It's really more about bureaucracy, right? Restructuring the bureaucracy and breaking down the vested interests that don't want it to change. But it's critical.
So here and then there. Sorry. Welcome.
Thank you for this very thought-provoking presentation. Against the backdrop of the dramatic statistics on incarceration in America as compared to other countries, can we look to any other countries, developing countries or developed countries, that do have the kind of racial disparities and income disparities that we have in America as a model? Are there other countries that we can look to as an example that do it a lot better?
Yeah, certainly the European countries do it a lot better. Now, the counter-argument would be they don't have the racial history, but they do have a recent immigrant history that's pretty powerful, and there are a lot of disparities in terms of who gets arrested and incarcerated in European countries, people of immigrant origin. But the approach is really very different. Let me just give you an example. In Germany, to become a prison guard, you have to do 2 years of training, essentially as a social worker, almost as a psychologist. And then you work in prisons where you're diffusing conflict and you're working with people and their problems and their trauma and their history and working through those things. And the ratio is much, much smaller where you're working really intensively with people. In our country, it's 2 weeks to be a corrections officer, and they give you, a baton, some mace, and just throw you out there with, 200 people that you've got to lock in cages. It's a completely different approach, and it's so destructive. It's one that leads immediately to a punitive model, to a model based on humiliation, based on power. And I don't want to say that the European countries have found the perfect solution and do it right, and there are all kinds of problems, and when you focus in, you can always find mistakes and just a situation that doesn't work for everybody. But it is such a different approach. It's one that's based on making people better so that when they get out, they don't commit other crimes. So that when they get out, they get employment. When they get out, they will succeed, and that time that they served is behind them. In this country, unfortunately, at least so far, until they implement our recommendations, the problem is that a criminal conviction, a criminal record, much less the trauma from having served time in prison, and our conditions here are so much worse than in other countries, than in other democracies. But the stigma is so powerful. It is so hard to make it. People are always brought back to something that they did often a long time ago, often one stupid mistake. And we all make mistakes. Not everybody gets caught. There's different types of mistakes. I should say in full disclosure that I was arrested when I was 13 years old and ended up spending half a day in a jail in London and had a juvenile record in the UK until I turned 18 and was banned for life from HMV music stores, but they don't exist anymore, so I'm okay. I was a juvenile delinquent doing stupid things, but I was able to overcome that for various reasons. And it happened in another country than the US. And of course, there's the racial element too. But, I think that we need to allow people to recover from their mistakes and to actually have a chance to go beyond them and to succeed. And we don't do a very good job of that so far in our country.
Last question here. Thank you.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about the race and equity issues. So in nonprofit and for-profit organizations in the US, now people are discussing diversity and inclusion, and they're more open about it. So they don't really address, I think, the race and equity issue head-on, but they do understand that there's something called unconscious bias. So I'm wondering whether in the criminal justice, the whole stream of it, whether there are entry points where one could use similar approaches as one does in the D&I space in corporate and nonprofit American, sort of try and address at least the unconscious bias issues that people are more willing to talk about than institutionalized racism.
Yeah, no, that's a major topic in the criminal justice field and the reform movement, is getting people trained in their implicit bias, certainly with police officers. And I mean, there it has deadly results, right? I mean, there we're talking about split-second decisions that are made about whether someone's holding a phone or wallet or a gun, right? And the disparities on race are very clear, and they do it with little video game simulations. And of course, we see it in the news that it happens, sadly, very frequently in reality too. But also in terms of the court system. The implicit bias is very, very strong. The research there is very clear. The solutions are a little bit harder to implement, and there's some resistance, right? And people are uncomfortable with any insinuation that they themselves are acting in a racist way. But when you look at the statistics on aggregate, it's undeniable. It is just factually true. Yet it's harder to find the solutions. But I think that, I mean, I have my students read a whole book on implicit bias, and we talk about it a lot. I have them take the IAT test out of Harvard that has, hundreds of thousands of people have done, and I have them grapple with their own findings, and it leads to some very powerful discussions. I think it's something that we all need to think about in our everyday lives, but certainly on a systemic level, I think it's a really important part of this that we need to keep pushing on and challenge ourselves to incorporate and find solutions that at least take out that possibility for the implicit bias to lead to these disparate outcomes that we see.
One of our other stakeholders is working on a project to look at prosecutors and performance/evidence-based prosecution. And one of the strands of that work is looking at the race equity bias in decisions that prosecutors make about who to charge and for how long, et cetera. So it's happening, like Mark said, across multiple different domains. Hopefully it will all roll up in the aggregate into real changes in the system. So Rich is standing, which means I should stop talking. Join me, ladies and gentlemen, in thanking Mark for sharing some time with us.
Thank you. To leave it at 1:20-ish, so it's short.
45 minutes. Lunch is theoretically set up in the back. Enjoy.
And they had you here? Okay.